Today we're going to be talking a little bit about dog-dog reactivity, and I wanted to just take a moment to introduce myself a little bit. As Danielle mentioned, I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Synergy Behavior Solutions here in Portland, and I have a personal interest in dog-dog reactivity, primarily because I've actually had to work with my own dogs on reactivity issues, but also because I've been working for over 12 years with clients working with dogs that have reactivity issues, both in classes, group classes, and in private settings. And it's just an area of interest that I have that I really love. I guess one of my big things that I get out of it is I see people starting to become a lot more confident and more relaxed with their dogs in public and a lot less embarrassed about the things they do. And that's the real motivating force for me, is really just seeing people get really happy about their dogs and less stressed about them. And so that's what I really, really love about working with dogs that have reactivity issues. A lot of our business is actually founded around the idea of working with dogs that have reactivity. We've actually started an entire series of classes called Reactive Rover, 3 different levels and 2 different advanced classes specifically for dogs that have reactivity issues, because a lot of dogs that have reactivity are limited in many ways from doing things that a lot of other dogs have access to, like agility and walking through neighborhoods and other types of skills that people like to work on. So we offer classes for dogs that have reactivity to help them be able to work on those skills, but with an understanding, and everyone else in the class coming from a viewpoint that they understand what reactivity is about, and they respect if a dog does react, that they're not going to give them a hard time about it. They're going to help them through the process and be supportive about it, because everyone's been through that same thing. I'm also a certified professional dog trainer, and the co-owner of our business, Dr. Vali Parthasarathi, is also here. She's going to be giving a talk a little bit later on, in not today, but later on in a month or so, talking about dog body language. And reading dog body language can be a really important factor in working on reactivity, understanding where their mind is at and where they are emotionally, so that you can help learn whether or not they're ready for something you're about to try from a training perspective, or whether you need to help them by increasing distance or doing something else to reduce the stress level. So just wanted to talk a little bit about what is reactivity. Different people have different definitions about what reactivity is. So I thought I'd start off a little bit and just talk a little bit about what reactivity is to me. To me, reactivity is something that's defined by a set of behaviors that dogs do. Some common behaviors include things like barking or whining. Other things are lunging, pulling, or leaping on leash. Snapping, snarling, or biting is another one. And when we're thinking about these things, we try not to associate it with an underlying cause. I think of them more as being a behavior by itself. So rather than referring to something as fear barking, I'm going to refer to it just as barking, and worry about looking for underlying cause later on once I have a little bit more detail about what's going on and what other types of body language I see that the dog is showing. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about where does it come from. So one of the things that you see with dogs that have reactivity is there's many different underlying causes. I'd say that the number one cause that we've seen is fear. And fear seems to be a real big factor for a lot of dogs when they're experiencing reactivity. And typically what you see with dogs that are having fear, they're actually doing some barking and lunging, and it's usually to keep the scary things away. The types of behaviors that they're doing are distance increasing behaviors. So those are the things that dogs do to try to make other dogs go further away from them, so that they're not having to experience them in close quarters. When you're thinking about this also, you want to be thinking about what types of things are indicators that your dog is fearful. And we're looking for body language from the dog, which can include things like shivering, having their ears back or their tail tucked, licking their lips is one of the ones that we see often. Hypervigilance, checking out the environment to make sure there's nothing coming at them. Yawning is another one. Stress panting is something else that you see with a lot of dogs that are experiencing fear or stress. And full body shake-offs. That's where a dog does this thing like they've got water on themselves, but they really don't, and they just shake their body after something that's a stressful experience. We call that a post-stress response oftentimes. Panting is something else that you can see. I think I may have mentioned that. Um, and avoidance and cowering is another thing that we oftentimes see with dogs. That's where they would be trying to avoid a situation that they don't want to get involved with. So you come up to a person and a dog, rather than approaching them to say hi, tries to go behind you. It's a pretty clear sign that they're starting to feel anxious about something. They may not be showing any reactivity, but it is definitely a fear sign. Now, something else that you want to think about, something else that we see a lot with dogs when they're reacting in when they're coming to us for help in our classes is over-arousal. That's also a really big factor in what happens. And that's kind of we sort of see a 50-50 mix mostly of dogs that are either fearful or over-aroused. When you see over-aroused dogs, typically what's happening is they're wanting to meet other dogs and they're having a really hard time controlling their excitement level. The other thing that you see is oftentimes they're building up and getting worse and worse at it because their excitement level and their frustration level is rising the more that they do that. And so that becomes a self-perpetuating process where the more they're frustrated from going to say hi to the animals, the worse and worse they get. So things to think about with dogs that are over-aroused is that oftentimes dogs that are over-aroused have poor impulse control skills. That means that they really don't have an easy time trying to resist an impulse that comes upon them. You oftentimes see dogs like this escalating from play into aggression rather rapidly. So they're playing, and then suddenly a moment later they're starting to bite the other dog. And oftentimes you see these dogs also having a really hard time calming down after they get excited. So they get escalated really quickly, and then they take a long, long stretch to get calm afterwards. If you tried to reintroduce a dog to a situation right after they'd had an incident, you might see them immediately go back to starting to react again. Something that comes up that I wanted to talk about a little bit is that there's often something that is a misattribution, something that's assigned as a label to what a lot of reactivity is, and that is dominance. Dominance, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Oftentimes dominance is used as a phrase, which is kind of a catch-all phrase for my dog is acting outwardly aggressive, my dog isn't obeying me. Sometimes they say that my dog isn't respecting me because they won't listen to me. And sometimes, even more likely, it might be because I just don't really know why my dog does this. So, that's often a catch-all phrase that I hear bandied about a lot by a lot of trainers and out in the news, the public sphere and the news sphere, and also on TV shows of certain kinds. So definitely, it's something you want to take with a really big grain of salt and think less about that as being a factor, because if you look at what dominance really is, dominance isn't actually a behavior or a dog type. It's actually defining a relationship between a dog and other dogs or a group of dogs. And the real definition is actually that it's a relationship between individuals, and the idea is that it's trying to allow access to a priority access to a resource that might be in limited supply. So a dog is approaching another dog's bone, which normally they get to chew on. They give them a stare. The other dog backs off. And that's a dominance display to indicate this is a resource of mine, I'll leave it alone. And they create a hierarchy based on that, on who gets to keep things. The thing to remember about this is that it can be very fluid, and I've seen puppy dogs that wouldn't even think of themselves as being less than the little pipsqueak in the house, defend a toy from an older adult dog in the house who's clearly in all other respects at a higher place in the echelon. So it's not something that's fixed in space and time that doesn't change. So it's not something you want to really assign as a permanent state for a particular dog. What you'll also see is in the types of things you're seeing in reactivity, the types of behaviors that are shown, the barking, the lunging, things of that type, they're not the same set of behaviors that you typically see in a dominance display from one dog to another. So I try to sort of avoid having that, and really there's not too much of a connection either in literature or in research to there being that kind of thing going on. So moving forward, what I'd rather do is, rather than thinking and worrying about definitions, I'd like to focus more on the behavior. So if your dog is doing something like acting outwardly aggressive towards other dogs, let's work out a way that we can decrease that arousal or stress. So how can we make it less likely that's going to happen? If your dog isn't obeying you, then think about helping them to overcome that over-arousal or that stress, and the obeying of the cues, the listening to you, asking them to sit, doing things like that will come naturally when they feel that they're in a state of mind where they're able to respond, where that stress isn't there, and they're able to think more clearly. If you feel that your dog isn't respecting you by not listening, same thing. I'd say that stress is going to produce no response. So definitely think about it in that terms. We want to do what we can to address the underlying issue, if you want to think of it as the disease of stress and anxiety or over-arousal, rather than focusing on the symptoms, which are my dog isn't sitting for me. So if you don't know why your dog does it, then that's okay. Don't worry about it. It would be interesting to know what it is that's causing the issue, why your dog isn't responding, but it's not absolutely required to improve their behavior to know that. So it's not critical to find out, 10 years ago my dog got attacked by a big black dog and that's why they're being reactive. Instead, let's focus on the present. Let's worry about what we can do to help them overcome that and become less reactive in their life with you. So the first thing you want to do when you're trying to help your dog overcome reactivity is doing something that we like to lump together as management, or that's how I describe it at least. And management is all about finding ways to prevent your dog from practicing a behavior that you don't want them to do. Because what happens is when your dog practices a behavior, it starts becoming more hard set. It starts becoming part of their natural repertoire of things that they do. And they start doing that as the default go-to rather than the thing you want them to do when they see another dog or when they experience some other type of reactivity like lunging at a squirrel or a cat. So the key is in the very beginning to prevent them from having opportunities to practice those behaviors and make them part of what they normally would go to. And the tough challenge of that is that the real world sets you up to fail in a lot of cases. And it trains your dog to go in the wrong direction. For instance, if you look at the picture that's on this slide, you'll notice that this dog on the right is really, really stiff. He's frozen. He's got a tight mouth. His eyes are wide. I would be surprised if in 5 seconds he isn't going off and reacting at this dog. But you also don't see a human nearby who's guiding him or helping him stop from having that opportunity to react. So I wouldn't allow this dog to be left in an opportunity where they have dogs passing by the fence and getting them to react every several minutes as a dog passes by, because that's just undoing any work that you would want to be putting into training your dog to do something different. So you want to find ways to make sure that that type of opportunity doesn't happen, that you're limiting their exposure when they're not being trained to do something different. Here's another example. If you see this dog up on the porch, they're sitting there and they're growling or barking at something that's passing by. So that is also a place where you might be having a dog practicing a behavior and becoming worse at something you don't like. So some places that dogs practice their reactivity, I just threw up a couple examples here. Yards is a really common one. On decks and porches is somewhere where you see it. At windows of houses, especially ones that face out over streets. In cars, barking when you come to a stop at a corner and there's a dog there. Some dogs will bark and lunge at people at gas stations that are coming up close to the car. And oftentimes people are describing that this is happening a lot on walks when they take their dogs on walks through the neighborhood. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is find ways to prevent your dog from having those opportunities to practice those unwanted behaviors. Later on, we'll be seeking out those situations and we'll be using that for training and teaching your dog a different behavior. But in the beginning, you want to kind of do a reset. Stop it from happening as much as you can, and then let's start readdressing it once you guys have some skills on board, once you feel comfortable knowing how to handle it, and how to start helping them become less and less reactive. Something else you want to be thinking about when you're doing this is that there may be something that's fighting against what your dog is learning, and it's making it much harder for them to progress. So definitely it's really important to seek out some help from your veterinarian. I think that you want to really check and see if there's any other underlying issues going on. Medical problems can really influence behavior to a great degree. And you can oftentimes see that pain can cause decreased tolerance to stressors in their life, which means that it may be making your dog worse, and it may be making it much harder for you to help them progress forward because it's constantly fighting against the level of difficulty or constantly increasing the level of difficulty that you're experiencing when you're out there training your dog. And something else that I've seen, especially in working in collaboration with Dr. Bully, is that for some dogs, medications can make a huge difference in terms of how well they can progress. And it can be the difference between night and day. I know some dogs that have gone through our classes and they've done really well with dogs, but they've gotten to a point where maybe they started freezing on walks and not wanting to cross over unusual surfaces. For instance, there was a dog in our Reactive River Open Air class who would freeze at the boardwalks that were down in the Pearl District and would not want to cross them no matter what, was terrified of going over those. The dog got prescribed some medications. After a month or two, the dog was on those. The dog just started opening up like a flower and went down to the Pearl, hit those boards like an old pro, went right across them the first try, didn't even worry about it. Now the dog is doing reactive river agility with us, is going over dog walks that are raised up 5 feet off the ground, through tunnels, all sorts of unusual surfaces. So it can make a huge, huge difference, especially for some dogs that are experiencing a lot of stress or fear. Something else you also want to be thinking about is there's a lot of complementary modalities out there and treatments that could be applied. Some people have used acupuncture, other people are using Bach flower essences, some people are using things like dog-appeasing pheromone. Many of those things are worth trying as a complementary modality, and I oftentimes say in conjunction with seeing if maybe medications might be good. I know some people will try the complementary ones first, along with training, and sometimes that's enough to make the difference. Maybe their dog just needed a little help to get over that little hump that they were facing that they couldn't get past. But for some dogs, they need a little bit of extra help, and that's where medications can come in play. I wanted to also talk to you guys a little bit about some of the tools that we recommend for people when they're working with us. I think first and foremost, one of the most important things is that when you're out there training your dog with reactivity, that you feel confident and relaxed about being able to control your dog and being able to move them out of situations that you feel might be necessary for. If your dog is pulling and lunging and you're also worrying about whether they're going to slam you flat on your face, then that's going to add a lot of stress to your experience with the training, and your dog is probably going to pick up on that, and it's going to make it more stressful for them as well. So first thing that we usually recommend is some kind of body control equipment of some kind. That's what I call it. And that can include things like a front clip harness, a head halter of some kind, or a head harness is sometimes called. And usually a regular 6-foot leash is what we'd recommend. I recommend against using things like flexi leads, things of that nature. First, because it's really hard to hold them in your hand when you're doing training and holding other pieces of equipment. And it's also really hard to retract or control or bring into a certain length fast enough to be able to respond to a training opportunity when it comes up. So definitely I prefer the fixed length leashes for that. Something I wanted to also talk about is that there's many other pieces of equipment out there that people I see using. And some of those things that they use are what I would call aversive, which means that they create some more stress or anxiety or pain in the dog. And in situations where you're dealing with a dog that may be already stressed or highly aroused about a situation, things like that can really work against you. Because if you're adding extra stress into a situation where a dog is already fearful of another dog, it's going to make them more anxious, and it's going to very possibly form a negative association with the thing they're staring at when they're having something yucky happen. They're looking at that dog over there, and they get a constriction on the pinch collar, they feel some pain, and they're staring at the dog. They say, oh, this is pretty bad. When I see dogs, pain starts happening, so I don't really want to be around dogs. They make me really worried. For dogs that are very highly aroused, I don't know if any of you are familiar with dogs that are used for police dog work, but when they train dogs for police dog work, they use something that's called an agitation collar, which is a constriction collar on the neck. And when they're getting them to be really excited and to go after a bad guy, that constriction happens, and they're getting them really revved up to send them out. So that constriction around the neck, like you produce from something like a choke collar, can potentially get them more and more excited and get them more intense about their reaction. So definitely recommend trying to avoid using things like that. Compression collars like the sporn, things of that nature, those are things also that I think are things that can create extra stress. And the e-collars, things like that also are going to create pain. So we try to avoid things like that because I think it's going to contribute to more problems and more potential side effects that you don't want. Also wanted to mention some other helpful tools. You see Rue here is eating on something yummy that's inside the tube. The stuff that's in the tube is peanut butter, and it might fall into all three of these categories that I've listed here of stinky, moist, maybe not meaty, but there are many things that will fall into one of those three categories, and mixtures of those often are the things that dogs find the most palatable, the most flavorful, and the most easy to keep eating over and over again as they're being trained. The reason why we want to have those treats, something that's really motivating, is each time as you're rewarding your dog for doing something good, they're getting a pleasant experience associated with it. And in the beginning, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about how emotions come into play a lot when dogs are getting comfortable with other dogs in the very beginning, especially. So you want something that's going to have a positive association, that's going to make that a more positive experience for them. And the thing that you see Rue eating the stuff out of is called a go tube. That's a little tube made out of silicone that has a little squeeze thing that you can fill up, and you can put whatever you like in there. Things I put in there are things like peanut butter, cream cheese, canned dog food, liver paste. Really, the sky's the limit. There was someone who was really fancy. They took some smoked salmon and blended it up with cream cheese. Their dog was getting this beautiful salmon paste. So, whatever is really exciting. If you're using something that's pretty fatty like that, obviously you want to balance that out with some other types of things. I really like canned dog food from that perspective, or something that's a pure meat. Like you can get canned meat supplements, which are 95% turkey or salmon or something like that, and they come in a very pate-like paste. Those are great to fill up those go tubes with. And the nice thing about the go tube is that it allows you to deliver either a continuous stream of treats by just parking it there and gently squeezing, or you can do a single lick kind of version of a treat. So for some different situations you might be doing in training, it offers you flexibility to do the two different ones. When you have a bunch of treats in your hand, there's going to be some point at which you may be running out of those and maybe faster than you want. So having something that will deliver a longer stretch of treats can be very practical. Something else for smaller dogs to think about that we recommend a lot is something like a long-handled wooden kitchen spoon. And that can be really helpful to save your back. It gives you that extra reach to put the peanut butter in front of your dog's mouth so they can lick it. And it doesn't require you to have to bend down to do that. Something else to think about is something that you can carry loose treats in, something like a bag, a treat bag of some kind. And that can be very practical for carrying those treats to reload your hand when you need it. Also, it can be practical for carrying loose treats, which sometimes we use as a defensive measure for off-leash dogs that might come at you. We do something that's called the treat explosion, where you'll take a handful of treats and the dog's coming at you, and you throw the treats at the dog. They sprinkle all over the floor, and that stops the dog, hopefully. Maybe they stop and they graze for a while on those nice meaty bits of hot dog that you've left behind. And while they're doing that, you're hightailing it out of there with your dog. I used this actually with a client of ours. We tested it with my dog, Brew, and she actually got 2 blocks away before he had finished eating the treats that she had left on the floor. Brew was very appreciative. So that's definitely something that you can use as a way to defend yourself if something is coming up on you and you may not have control over it. Other helpful tools I'd like to introduce you guys to, and we talked a little bit about this for alternative modalities, something like a thunder shirt that you see the dog on the top showing off, and actually it's actually also on our demo dog here, which I really ought to put up here, if you can see that. Thunder shirts are kind of cool. They actually provide this compression on the dog's body, and there's some schools of thought that believe that that compression is kind of like swaddling a child, and it creates some more comfort and relaxation. I think we found that maybe 50% of dogs that have it on see some type of decrease in their level of anxiety. 50% see little or no reaction, no response at all, and very, very few show any kind of negative response. So it's one of those things where we say, yeah, give it a try. The nice thing about it, too, is that with Thundershirt, the company's policy is if it doesn't produce a positive effect for your dog, they'll actually take it back, no questions asked. So that's a really great policy that they have, and I love the fact that they back it up like that. Something else that you might want to consider is what you see on the bottom there. That's something that's called a calming cap. A calming cap is kind of like a fly hood for a horse. If you've ever seen something like that, it covers the eyes of the animal, and it allows them to see a little bit. It's kind of like looking through a very thick nylon stocking. You can see kind of hazy images, and things that are close by are a little bit visible, but anything beyond a couple feet is very, very hazy and hard to see. So it can give you the ability to keep your dog's visual area of interest very, very close to their body and not allow them to see things that are further away, which can be really good for transporting them in the car. If you don't have something like a crate that you could put in the car and cover up, which is another way that we recommend transporting dogs, so you're not having those inadvertent exposures. So it's a great way for a smaller car to be able to do that. It's great for getting from point A to point B. If you need to get from your car to the inside of a vet clinic and there's lots of dogs around, it may give you the means of getting there without having them exposed to seeing those dogs. And you would introduce it gradually in the same way that you might introduce something like a head collar or a muzzle or something else, feeding treats through the hole and getting them to eat that while it's laying on their head and then taking it off, and then gradually doing that over a series of sessions till you can have it fully on like the way that Rue is demonstrating it here, so that you can wear it for several minutes to up to 20, 30 minutes at a time, depending on how long you have to have it for. I've had a few reports from people going through our Reactive Over Foundations class. There's a couple people who had really small cars and very big dogs, and they had to get to the class somehow, and they said their dog was just going crazy the entire way there. They just report amazing results. They say the trip is like, just a pleasurable experience now. Their dog is not reacting. Their dog is calm and relaxed the whole way there. And that way, by the time they arrive at the place where they want to train, their dog hasn't just completely gotten themselves so over-aroused and excited that they're going to have a hard time throughout the class. They're kept nice and calm until you're ready to train them. And then you can work on it at a level where they're going to be much more responsive. So tools like this can be really helpful for stuff like that. Some other tools that we often recommend for different situations, if you look at the bottom there, you'll see something that's a citronella spray. I've used that very effectively in our open air class where we go on group walks with dogs through neighborhoods. And sometimes people let their dogs roam loose or run up to you down a walking trail off of Forest Park or something like that. And you need to keep that dog away from your group of dogs, or in your case, your own dog. So what I've done is actually I've laid down a cloud of vapor, of citronella vapor, in front of the dog, and it's been very, very effective at keeping the dogs away. I've actually never had to hit a dog in the head with the citronella, which I understand actually causes an uncontrollable sneezing fit in dogs. So it's nothing painful, but it is very irritating. All I've had to do is basically just hiss it a couple times in front of them and create this puffy cloud that happens. And most dogs are perfectly willing to walk away after that. Unfortunately, I haven't had to do it a bunch of times, but when I have had to use it, it's been really, really good. And I always think of it as protecting the safety of the other dogs because, they may be friendly, but if your dog gets upset at them and then they get, upset at each other, it can become a fight and then someone can get hurt. So if anyone ever complained about it, I would just say, hey, I was just trying to protect the safety of your dog, and by the way, your dog is illegally off leash here and really ought to be contained and controlled more. So that's very effective. The thing that you see in the upper right, that is a muzzle that we often recommend called the Baskerville Ultra Muzzle. It's a wonderful muzzle. We call this the Happy Fun Hat when we're talking with us about our dog, with the dogs that we work with. They get introduced to it in a way that it becomes a food bucket, and they come running to us from the other side of the house when we pull it off the shelf, and they dive their head into it. They love having it on because they know that training is going to be happening when that's going on, and they are using it in a really, really happy way. The muzzle itself, this one is made out of this soft, flexible rubber. and it's a hard rubber, so they could actually bonk their nose against the front of it and it wouldn't be hurting them because it flexes. It was designed by a behaviorist, which is why you see all these big open gaps in the front of it, because it's really easy to get treats in there, which is what you want to be doing when you're training with this. You want to be rewarding your dog for all sorts of good behaviors, and we would be doing that when you're in close quarters with another dog. So we start with dogs working at distances where they're reacting maybe at 50, 60, 100 feet away, and we gradually whittle that down until now they're starting to walk closely with other dogs, and they're becoming more relaxed. So when you start getting into those close quarters interactions where you want to have that extra degree of safety and you want to have a safety belt in place, so in case your dog does get upset about something and they're pushed beyond what they're able to handle, you don't have to stress about it. They react, you move away, you reset, you try it again at an easier level, and they can succeed, but you had that safety in place so you didn't have to worry about it. Also great to get your dogs comfortable wearing these if they're going into stressful situations like at the vet's office, or you're working on getting your dog comfortable with kids. Definitely where you need some safety like that for 5 or 10 minutes at a time during training, this can be a really practical thing to have with you. We throw these on in our open air classes when we're doing face-to-butt and face-to-face sniffing with other dogs in class. All the dogs are trained to use these, so that for that 5 or 10 minute interval where we're working on that, we have 100% absolute safety until we can feel sure that the dogs are doing well with each other. Then we can start taking them off and working on interactions without the muzzle on. But we have that building towards that plan. So as I mentioned earlier, reactivity really is at its essence an emotional issue for dogs. And dogs typically react because they're experiencing some kind of emotional spike where they're feeling anxious or excited, or sometimes it's both of those when they see another dog. And our feeling is that your first job, when they're starting to get into that state of mind, is to help them gain a better way of dealing with it and to learn to be more calm and relaxed when they see another dog. And the way that we achieve that is through a technique that's called classical conditioning. I'm going to try not to throw around too many technical words here, but we like to use the words that are very commonly used in the behavior world, because if you are going to communicate it with somebody, it's really important to have a good understanding of what it is you're doing so that when you explain it to somebody else, they can instantly say, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to do here. So we refer to that. It's classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is essentially about helping your dog learn that when a dog shows up, something good's going to happen instead of something stressful. So what will happen eventually is they're going to start anticipating that. They're going to start feeling that, oh, a dog showed up. I can't wait, something great. I feel like something great's about to happen. And so they start feeling relaxed and happy about it rather than, oh my gosh, there's a dog. They start feeling that when that dog shows up, something good is going to happen. The way that this works is through classical conditioning, you're going to have a dog that shows up in the environment. You're going to wait until your dog notices the dog, either by hearing them or seeing them. And it can be either one. It just depends on what the circumstances entail and how sensitive your dog might be to the sound of a dog versus seeing a dog. When they do notice the dog, you're going to deliver a continuous reward to the dog as they experience the dog. So I would bring my go tube down and I'd park it in front of the mouth like we see on the bottom picture there. Ta-da! There's a dog! Or you would bring your handful of treats and you'd park it right in front of their mouth. They would be munching on it. And then you want to make sure to end that exposure to the dog before they lose interest in the treats and before they get overwhelmed by the experience. And loss of interest in treats is a sure sign, or lack of interest in treats is a sure sign that wherever you're trying to work your dog, they're above their threshold. And you need to find a place to set it up for lower level of intensity to help them before they're ready for that level of exposure. So make sure that they're still eating, and then you're walking them out of there to help them and help them break eye contact and help them get them out of the scenario. Now, that being said, the way we do that in class is we have barriers set up so you can pop out and then pop back behind the barrier. In the real world, you might have to use something like the edge of a car or the edge of a building or something else to help them do that. So after they've learned to be more comfortable and relaxed and they're starting to respond, they're starting to see dogs and say, hey, this is great. There's a dog over there. Mom, did you notice? That's really good. At that point, you're going to want to teach them a practical skill of some kind. So there's different types of things that you can have a dog do once they're starting to think rationally about seeing a dog and staying calm. One of our things that we like to do is the first one that's on the bullet list there, which is look calmly at the dog and then look away. And that's something that we call the look at that game. So they see a dog, they make eye contact, and then they break eye contact to get a treat. And so that's what we work on. Other people work on things like teaching them to do tricks, like a shake or a spin after they see a dog, or while they're around a dog, so they're learning to do something that is practical and non-reactive. Hand targeting, getting them to target a hand or touch is another thing that we do. Tugging on a toy might be something. Oh, there's a dog. Hey, look, we get to play now. And really anything else that they enjoy is a valid option as long as it's not something that's reactive. Right? So you get them past the emotional upsetness. Once you move past that, then you start working on teaching them something good to do instead of reacting. And of course, without tooting the horn too much, I think that classroom situations can be really great for dogs because it can help your dog progress at a pace that is good for them and doesn't get them overexposed too quickly. And you get a lot of feedback talking to you about what things are happening, what kind of body language your dog is showing. And really, it's very supportive because it helps you through it at a pace that your dog can handle. In the real world, it's tough to set that up, but with a friend who could be a spotter and make sure there's nothing sneaking up on you, with an environment where you don't have to worry about things coming in from other directions, it's all about right in front of you, you can set things like that up yourself, but it's much more challenging. In the first picture you see at the top there, this is our foundation, our Reactive Rover Foundations class, where dogs are starting to learn to look at other dogs and look away. So they've gotten past the emotional upsetness point, and this dog, the Border Collie on our lower left of the screen, is looking at my dog Rue. We've actually started using stuffed dogs more, but more often than not, actually other dogs in the class for training. So this is a little bit of an older picture, but we're getting to that stage where we're starting to work on the look at that game. After progressing through this class and a couple of other classes that we have, dogs will progress to our advanced skills classes. And one of our classes that we offer is called the Reactive Rover Open Air class that I was mentioning, where we take group walks through neighborhoods with dogs. They've worked with each other, they've learned to be comfortable walking into closer quarters with each other, and this is the ultimate outcome of working at that level and keeping on working with your dog to the point where they're comfortable. All of these three dogs were reactive at larger distances in the very beginning. And now we're walking through the park blocks near PSU, not only in close quarters with each other, but also seeing other dogs that are roaming around in the parks. So you can take dogs that have been reactive at very big distances and whittle it down gradually, a little bit at a time, until they get to that level of comfort being near other dogs. So that's where I wanted to finish it for today. So I wanted to thank you all for coming, and I thank the Healthy Pets Northwest for providing the space, Animal Community Talks for providing the venue, and Flickr Community Commons, which has helped me a lot with some of the pictures that we've shown here, which were really cool. And of course, I'd really love to thank our Reactive Rover clients who've been really helpful in helping us learn about reactivity and giving us lots of stories about how their dogs are progressing even after classes are finished that make us feel really proud about where they're at and really happy about how they're progressing with things. I also want to thank all of you guys for coming today and lending me your ears, and I wanted to see if there were any questions.
It all sounds fantastic, and so when you were mentioning like that one dog who was on great defense without owners around, so if you have to leave your dog alone at home, do you recommend just kennelling so that they don't have like all the stimulation of windows and doors and things like that?
Possibly, but there's lots of things you can do inside the house to prevent or limit exposure. So things like baby gates are really great for enclosing an area of the house that they can be contained into. We recommend a lot something that's called Artscape, which is a type of window film that you can put on windows. It's applied with water, so it's really easy to peel off later. But it basically makes your lower windows into frosted glass. So you have light coming through, but you don't have to worry about your dog looking out over the street where they might be barking. You can put up barriers around the edges of your porch, things like slats or something else like that to limit exposure, or put tarps around the edges of areas like that. We have a dog that lives next to us that is a fence fighter and very reactive. We put up tarps, and that dog now barks whenever we come out, but my dogs don't do anything because they've learned that basically we walked out with them for a while, rewarding them with treats. Now they just ignore the barky dog behind the fence because they can't see it running at the fence anymore. So, things like that can be really helpful for limiting that exposure. And it's hard. You have to sometimes talk to people a little bit about, it's maybe not the best idea to leave them outside during the day because they're really practicing things you don't want them to practice, and making a nuisance of themselves in the neighborhood. And they may be able to get through. You notice that fence there? There's a gap. What if a dog came down and tried to sniff, and then that dog bit the other dog in the face when they were trying to come up and say hi? Things like that can also happen. So definitely, but there's a lot of things you can do to manage the environment. It's called Artscape, and it comes in frosted glass, stained glass, Japanese rice paper. I mean, lots of different designs. So it looks really cool. A Home Depot. Yeah, Home Depot consistently has it. And I think actually, as an added bonus, they're a local Portland company. So, yeah.
Well, when you have a reactive rover class, I imagine your clients all proceed at different rates, make different amounts of progress. How do you set up your clients to have realistic expectations about the progress that they're going to make, or how often their dog will be able to be around other dogs?
Yeah. So that's actually a really good question. And that's something we want to try to address with people right at the very beginning, is having an understanding that every dog in class is in a different place in their lives, a different set of exposures that they've experienced. So comparing yourself to the progress of other people in class really is not very practical, because there could be one dog in class who's been barking at other dogs for 10 years, and now they're coming into class and trying to work on that. There might be another dog who's only been doing it for 3 months. So that's one of the reasons we keep our class sizes really small, to make sure that we can give a lot of individual attention to each person and help them progress at whatever pace they're at. There might be one dog in class that's just peeking out from the barriers for 2 seconds or so to watch the other dogs in class, while other dogs are circling out into the middle of the room and walking around in circles. And maybe they're being the real distraction dogs in the middle of the class because they can handle long exposures, close distances. The other dogs, they maybe need some more distance and shorter exposures. So we set it up at whatever level people need to help them progress and succeed, so that they're not being overexposed, but we're always trying to push the envelope for that individual person to make sure that they're making progress relative to their own dog's skill level and help them move forward, so that they're feeling some accomplishment. Something else we also do is at the beginning of every class, we try to get together and gather people and talk about the week's successes. So talking about, did they get out there? Did they work with their dog? What did they see that surprised them that their dog did really well at? And also address any concerns or issues that came up, but really try to emphasize some of the positive elements so that people don't get stuck on, oh, my dog was barking and had this explosion. It's like, yeah, but what about those 20 times your dog's passed by those other dogs and didn't, right? If they're walking by and 20 times, 19 times out of 20, they're walking by calmly, and 1 time out of 20, they're barking, it's okay. Those are going to be lost in the wash completely. It's the thing I tell my clients is it's not about perfection, it's about percentages. And if you can get your percentages in the right place, then those few reactions here and there, those are going to be completely gone. That's not going to matter. Yeah. Yes?
What do you suggest for a dog that's not treat or toy related?
So one thing that I try to examine with those dogs is there something that's causing them a lot of stress in the situations we're trying to expose them to that's shutting down that food drive? And it can be that something as broad-ranging as an environmental stressor can be a factor. I know dogs that will walk out their front door and they won't eat treats. Inside the house they eat, they take 2 steps outside and they stop eating. So we need to start getting those dogs on a program of desensitization to environment, where they walk out and they start doing picnics on their back porch, eating their dinner with yummy hot dogs and something else going on, so that they start learning that the outside isn't scary, even though you've learned that it's scary because there's a lot of scary things that happen out there, like dogs showing up and people riding by on skateboards and stuff like that, you need to get rid of those environmental stressors before you even start thinking about working on the dog stressors. Something else to think about is really looking at seeing if there's any medical issues going on. So it might be something like a stomach ulcer or something else that's causing there to be lack of appetence like that. And there's a lot of things like that that can make it harder for you. It's very unusual for a dog that isn't having some kind of issue like that going on not to be interested in food. Food is kind of a driving motivator for dogs, so I start wondering if maybe there might be something else that's causing some kind of lack of interest in that area. Lack of interest in toys can also be a sign of stress. They may be getting overwhelmed by the social pressure that's being placed on them, having to interact with you and with a toy, getting close. So you might find ways for the dog to interact with toys at bigger distances, like having a ball on a rope with a tease pole and dragging it at a big distance away from you so they have to chase it around, but it doesn't have to be really close to your body where they feel a little more worried. So you can get dogs to engage and become more happy about toys and get that to be something you can use as a motivator if you can find ways to help get them past those stressors. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for listening.